Like I said, it's a setup here. All right. So this here is very, 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 very important. If you're still using a stock cap for the timing, remember that is looking for a specific OEM based even mechanical type of timing. So when you get aftermarket cams, you shave your head, you deck your block, that is never gonna be right. So if you know, you know. If you don't, then you need to find out, because no matter what you do, you could degree your cams, everything like that. But whenever you go with a timing light and try to put your car on base timing, you're never gonna be on point. So that's why it's very important to have one of these dampeners with an adjustable pointer. So obviously, the first thing you do, you find true top dead center. You know, um, so I usually go, you know, bottom out at zero, come the other way. There's a specific way to do it. Usually, you rotate it, you go 20 thousandths, and then you rotate it the other way, and you go another 20 thousandths, and then you basically, like, this one was kind of perfect. We were 7 degrees before top dead center, and then we were 7 degrees after top dead center. So I knew that where the pointer was perfect. So that's true top dead center, like super accurate top dead center. So whenever that light flashes, whatever degrees it reads, that's exactly what the motor is doing. Like where the mechanical side of the motor is at versus the ECU. The ECU could say 20 degrees, you can have it at 30 degrees on timing, but if everything here is not 100%, you might say the ECU might say 30 degrees, you might see 30 degrees on everything, but the motor is probably 25 or 35. Yeah, so anyways, boom. So, all right. To me personally, I think the intake side I mean, both is important, but I'm gonna show you guys what I think the important parts of degreeing is. So we're gonna go piston starting going down. This is after the compressor stroke. So this is when the spark plug fires and it combusts and the piston starts going down, and then so the exhaust starts opening up. So the exhaust starts the way you read this. The exhaust will start opening up a certain degrees before bottom dead center. And obviously that's what, the exhaust gases start, coming out. And then you reach your peak lift. Okay, so your peak lift on your cams is gonna be your center line. So it has to be at a certain degrees. I'm not gonna really get into for instance, here we're at basically it says 103. It's supposed to be at 104, but it's basically a 104 because these cams are already degrees, so everything is already perfect. So what that means is, your valve has to be at peak lift at a certain degrees of the crank. From the factory, like Skunk 2, they did their testing and everything, and that's what they recommend. So that's what I always put it at. And then from there, if you do valve to valve clearances and stuff like that, valve to piston clearances, you can kind of move these around to find the maximum potential of the motor. But I really don't. With customers motors, I just degree it and keep it there. I don't try to do any R&D on there. So that would be the peak lift on the exhaust side. So now, obviously, the exhaust starts closing. So I'll show you guys something. So the piston's coming up. So now it's pushing a lot of the exhaust gases out. And now here we go. So this is overlap. So overlap allows the cold air to come in and help push out the hot air. So whenever it's on its compression stroke, or whenever it starts pulling in fresh air, there's not the cylinder temperature is low as possible because the intake starts opening up and pulling in unusable air unusable air to flush out all the exhaust gases. So you see the intake starts opening. Intake starts opening. Exhaust is still open. Now the exhaust is closed. So now, right now is where. So here's the tricky part. Here's the tricky part on overlap. I think it's gonna be a sweet spot because from what you just saw on the overlap, technically the exhaust was open. I didn't really count how long the exhaust was open. So you got to remember, you don't want to have too much overlap, and you want to have a sweet spot because you got to remember, as this intake valve is opening, this valve is open, and this is under low pressure. So that air is literally coming in and kind of going out of the exhaust, and instead of filling the cylinder, it's coming in and exiting the exhaust. So I didn't really count how much lift it went, but you're kind of wasting that much air when the intake valve is open. So now the exhaust valve is closed. So now we're gonna keep opening the intake. So now we're at peak lift. So primarily the whole time the intake valve was opening, the exhaust valve was still open as well. So on the downside of the valve, you're really not getting any type of but some of the air is exiting from the exhaust. So this part right here is, to me, one of the most important things of as far as figuring out what compression you want to run. So for instance, mostly everybody knows about static compression, which static compression is a volume with the piston all the way to the bottom versus at the top. So you buy pistons that are 12 to 5 compression. It's never gonna be 12 to 5 compression. It's always gonna be less. So say you want to target your motor at 11.0, right? You would literally have to make your motor say 12.5 to bring it back depending on the cam. So I'm gonna show you guys. So it's at peak lift. Now the exhaust valve, the intake valve is closing. So to me, this is one of the most important things. It's called the degrees. It's called the ABDC, after bottom dead center degrees. So it's closing. I didn't even really count, but I kind of know where it's gonna be. Okay, so this is bottom dead center. So we're already 10 degrees after, and the intake valve is still open. So now the piston started coming up 10 degrees. So which means we're leaking compression on the compression stroke. So we're going, I think this is, let me see. This is 10. So I'm gonna go one more. All right. So when you see on a cam sheet, the after bottom dead center, usually it's going to say at 0.05 lift. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, about 49 degrees. So what that means, the piston is coming up basically 49 degrees of crank rotation before the intake valve gets to 0.05 lift. Now, technically that's still open. So you're not even really gaining any compression. So if you have a stock GSR and it made X amount of horsepower, right? So I know a stock GSR, they close, I'll tell you exactly, 10, 20, 30, 40. Stock GSR at 0.05 lifts closes at 40 degrees, right? So we have 10 degrees that the valve is still open, right? So you would make on a GSR with stock cams, your dynamic compression is going to be higher. So now if I put Pro 3s on, I'm actually, and then on top of that, this is only at 0.5. So these cams in itself are just like way bigger. So at 0.5, we're gonna go to, this is what I like to use. I like to use at 0.1, 0.01, because that's like as close as possible to zero. This is at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, about 64 degrees. I believe stock around 50. So you have about 15 degrees in crank rotation that the valve is open longer. So you literally lose, say your dynamic compression on stock GSR is let's say 9.5, and you make X amount of horsepower. Then you put Pro 3s or say whatever aftermarket cams, and your dynamic goes from 9.5 to 8.5. Now you lost that horsepower. So let's say every point is 15 horsepower. So you went from 165 to the wheel just by losing that compression. Now you're down to 150. Then you gain from the flow of the cams. So say you gain 20, so you only make 5 horsepower. And then you're complaining that they didn't make power, but you gotta understand, you lost power from leaking more compression. That's why when you look at a cam card, they say they require a certain amount of compression to push the cams. And then we go to closing. And if you want exact closing, I mean, it takes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 degrees of the crank rotating for the valve to actually be closed. Technically, this is where you start making your compression. So in a technical form, you could actually, if you want to get technical with it and you want to target, the maximum type of compression you could run on 93 pump is about 12.0. So you can technically build a motor that's 15.5 compression, which I did, a 15.5 compression, as long as you know that where your valve is closing and you do the math, and if it's 12.0 or lower, then you could run 93 pump. Everybody's stuck on the static compression and not really looking at dynamic. So that's basically 1, 2, 3 of what I think is important and why you need to do it. Even so, for instance, when you cut your head, when you mill your head or you deck your block, I think it retards your timing a certain amount. I can't remember the exact number how much it does. So that's why it's super important to actually degree, and on top of that, have some type of adjustable pointer to really set your new timing, because that, like, you could do everything here, but when you do the ECU side, the ECU is gonna tell, okay, 20 degrees here, but is that where the motor is really at? Obviously you could target 20 degrees on your timing cap, but that timing cap was made for OEM GSR at 16 degrees, 16 and a half, 17 degrees, or whatever it's going to be at. So it's never going to be 100% correct, because whenever you cut your head, whenever you deck your block, it distorts the height of your motor. And these kind of measurements, is a big deal on the engine. So very, very important, man.